humanity had always believed in mercy. Even in the darkest corners of war, there had been rules lines that no species dared to cross. Medicine was sacred. Healers were untouchable. No matter how brutal a conflict became, doctors and medics were spared, their work respected as something beyond the boundaries of battle. The United Earth Defense Council had upheld this belief for centuries, offering aid even to those who had once been enemies. It was not weakness, but strength, proof that even in war, humanity could remain something greater than just another conquering force. The medical outpost Compassion had embodied that principle. A floating sanctuary between the stars, it had served as a neutral ground, treating wounded soldiers and civilians alike, regardless of their allegiance. Earth's doctors worked alongside alien physicians, their hands steady, their hearts resolute. Patients came in scarred and broken, and they left with hope. There was no greater mission than that. Then the Valkyrie came. The attack wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Compassion had no weapons, no shields powerful enough to withstand an assault. They weren't soldiers. They were healers, caretakers of the wounded. And yet, the Valkyrie descended upon them with no hesitation, no warning. The first strike came in the form of an orbital bombardment, an overwhelming force of plasma and fire that shattered the facility's main structure in seconds. The shock wave tore through the outer wings of the station, sending debris and bodies spiraling into the void. The distress signal went out immediately. A desperate plea, not for reinforcements, but for mercy. This is Compassion. We are under attack. We are unarmed. We have wounded here. Stop. Please, for the love of Dash. The transmission cut off in a burst of static. But the footage had already reached Earth. Billions of people watched in horror as live feeds showed what happened next. The Valkyrie didn't just fire upon the station, they hunted down survivors. Emergency escape shuttles were targeted as they launched, turned into fireballs before they could clear the blast radius. The few medical personnel who managed to make it to evacuation pods were captured, dragged from the wreckage, their fates left unknown. The galaxy had seen war before, but this was different. This wasn't conquest. It wasn't even retaliation. It was something worse. It was cruelty. Humanity had always been willing to negotiate, to seek diplomacy over destruction. But the destruction of Compassion changed everything. In that single act, the Valkyrie had shattered the illusion of peace. They had crossed the one line that no one dared cross. They had not just attacked humanity. They had made it personal. Within hours, the United Earth Defense Council convened in an emergency session. There was no debate. No back and forth between diplomats. Everyone already knew what had to be done. Protocol Nemesis was activated. The warships did not move. The fleets did not mobilize. That was never how this was going to end. The Valkyrie expected humanity to respond with soldiers, with a full-scale assault. Instead, they sent something else. Something older. Something far worse. The Guardians had been a name spoken only in whispers, a force rarely seen and even more rarely acknowledged. They weren't an army. They weren't conquerors. They were something different, something humanity had once needed, but had long since buried. Until now. The Valkyrie had made a grave mistake. They thought they were the apex predators of the galaxy. They believed they had nothing to fear. But they had never met the Guardians. They had never faced warriors who had been trained not just to fight, but to end wars before they even began. 12 operatives. No fleets. No armies. Just shadows moving through the darkness, slipping past Valkyrie defenses like ghosts. They did not announce their arrival. They did not issue threats. Instead, one by one, Valkyrie strongholds began to go silent. Entire military installations were found abandoned, their forces missing without a trace. The ones who remained were left to tell the story of whispers in the dark, of shadows that moved too fast to see, of something watching them from beyond their own senses. The most feared species in the galaxy had finally learned what it meant to be afraid. But it was not just about vengeance. This was never about simple retaliation. It was about making a statement, one that no one in the universe would ever forget. The Guardians did not simply destroy. They dismantled. They broke the Valkyrie without firing a single shot in open battle. Their weapons were precision, fear, and control. And then, when the Valkyrie were at their weakest, when their own people turned against them in desperation, the final message came. A broadcast, not from the Council, not from a general, but from the Guardians themselves. A single figure stood in the heart of Valkyrie territory, inside their most secure war room. He did not shout. He did not rage. His voice was calm, steady, and utterly terrifying in its certainty. You don't know us. But you will. We are the Guardians. We were meant to be forgotten. But you have forced us to return. You killed our healers. Now we come for you. The war was over before it had even begun. The Valkyrie High Council, once arrogant and unyielding, surrendered within the day. Their forces laid down their arms, not because they were outgunned, but because they knew there was nothing they could do to stop what was coming. And then, just as quickly as they had appeared, the Guardians were gone. No parades. No public acknowledgement. Their existence was nothing more than a rumor once again. But the message remained. A new medical station was built where compassion had once stood, larger, stronger, its foundation forged in the memory of those who had been lost. And on its entrance, a plaque was placed, written in 100 languages, for all who would come seeking aid. We come in peace. Please don't make us come any other way. The universe had always known humanity as diplomats, explorers, and sometimes warriors. But above all, they were seen as merciful. Even in war, they sought understanding before destruction. They built, they healed, they created. They extended hands in friendship, even when those hands were bitten. It was their way. Their belief. Their law. The destruction of compassion changed that. The footage had been played across every screen on Earth and beyond. Billions had watched as doctors, nurses, and the wounded were slaughtered without reason. They saw the escape pods burned before they could reach safety. They heard the desperate pleas for mercy, followed by silence. The silence was what haunted them most. For the first time in centuries, the people of Earth did not want peace. They did not want negotiations or explanations. They wanted something else. Retribution. The United Earth Defense Council convened within hours, but there was no debate. The vote was unanimous. The fleets remained where they were. The admirals did not prepare for war. War was too simple, too predictable. The Valkyrie had invited conflict, expecting humanity to respond as they always had, with diplomacy first, battle second. But they had underestimated just how deep humanity's history ran, how many lessons they had learned from a past filled with both great mercy and unimaginable violence. The Valkyrie had not declared war against soldiers. They had not struck a fleet or a fortress. They had struck at the heart of something sacred. They had crossed the one line that no one ever crossed. And for that, humanity did not send an army. They sent something else. Protocol Nemesis had been a whisper, a relic of a time when Earth had faced enemies so terrible that normal warfare had not been enough. It was a ghost of the past, something locked away because it was too dangerous to exist in a civilized galaxy. But the galaxy had proven itself uncivilized. And so, the ghosts returned. The Guardians had no uniforms, no public records, no medals to honor their existence. They did not fight wars. They ended them. They did not hold territory. They erased it. They were the blade in the dark, the hand that reached from nowhere and took everything. For centuries, they had been silent, waiting in the shadows. Now, they moved. 12 operatives. No warships. No armies. Just shadows slipping through the cracks of the universe, unseen, unheard, unstoppable. They arrived without warning. They did not announce themselves. The first Valkyrie fortress fell into silence within hours, its communications blacked out, its officers disappearing without a trace. No alarms were raised. No shots were fired. Yet when a recon team was sent to investigate, they found only empty corridors, abandoned weapons, and the scent of something unnatural in the air. The soldiers had vanished, their fate unknown. Then it happened again. A second outpost. A third. Then an entire fleet, found drifting in space, its crew missing, the ships intact but lifeless. The Valkyrie High Command scrambled, unsure of what they were facing. Pirates. Saboteurs. Some unknown alien force? They reinforced their security, tightened their defenses, and doubled their patrols. It didn't matter. The Guardians walked through their walls as if they were mist. A whisper in the dark. A flicker in the corner of the eye. A name spoken in terror, cut off before the sentence could finish. One by one, Valkyrie officers disappeared. Their generals turned up in their own war rooms, lifeless, untouched by any visible wounds. Their supply chains collapsed. Their forward bases crumbled under the weight of their own paranoia. The Valkyrie, who had once been the most feared species in the galaxy, who had conquered and slaughtered without hesitation, now knew fear themselves. They spoke of the silent ones. The ghosts. The avengers of the fallen. Then, finally, the message came. The Guardians did not broadcast their arrival. They did not issue a declaration of war. They sent only one message, spoken by a single voice. Calm. Unshaken. Absolute. You were given a chance to be better. You chose violence instead. You struck our healers. You broke the one law that held this galaxy together. Now, you will understand what it means to beg and be denied. And with those words, the final phase began. The Guardians were not simply assassins. They were executioners. They did not just kill, they dismantled. They whispered into the ears of Valkyrie commanders, twisting their own paranoia against them. False orders were given. Entire fleets turned against each other, believing they had been betrayed from within. Civil war erupted among their ranks, their empire fracturing under the weight of its own terror. Within days, the Valkyrie government fell into chaos. Their leaders, once so arrogant, now hid in their fortresses, afraid to sleep, afraid to breathe. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. The Guardians did not finish with a final strike. They did not burn cities or glass planets. They left a message, one that would last far longer than any act of destruction. On every Valkyrie world, in every shattered base, the same symbol was found. A simple mark, carved into steel, burned into the walls. It was not a name. Not a warning. It was a promise. A reminder that they had been watched. That they had been judged. And that the sentence had been carried out. The Valkyrie surrendered before the day was over. There was no negotiation. No demands. They simply offered everything they had: reparations, prisoners, apologies. Anything to stop the ghosts from coming again. Anything to make the whispers go silent. Humanity did not celebrate. There was no triumph in vengeance, no glory in what had been done. Only a quiet understanding that the line had been restored. The lesson had been learned. A new medical station was built where compassion had once stood. It was larger, stronger, more secure than before. The doctors returned, their hands steady, their hearts unchanged. They would heal again. They would show mercy again. But above its entrance, written in every language known to the galaxy, was a simple plaque. We are the light. But in the darkness, we are something else. Remember that. The Valkyrie had ruled through fire and blood, carving their empire into the stars with the brutality of a species that had never known fear. Their fleets blackened the skies of 100 worlds, their warriors celebrated conquest as their birthright. For centuries, they had taken what they pleased, knowing that no one could stop them. Until now. The flames they had unleashed upon compassion had burned too brightly. They had turned their weapons against those who did not fight, against those who existed only to heal. In doing so, they had broken something far more powerful than any fleet or army. They had broken the unspoken law that bound all civilizations together, the sanctuary of the healer. They had not just made an enemy. They had awakened something far worse. The Guardians did not come as conquerors. They did not seek war, nor did they revel in destruction. But they came with a purpose, and that purpose burned with a fury that the Valkyrie had never known. Their first true message was delivered not in words, but in fire. The capital of Valkyr Prime, a fortress world that had never known invasion, awoke to find its skies darkened by something unnatural. Its defense grid, a vast network of satellites and automated weapons, had gone silent. Its warships, stationed in perfect formation across the orbital pathways, drifted lifelessly, as if their very power had been drained from them. The people of Valkyr Prime looked up in confusion. Then in horror. The fire came not from the heavens, but from within. Entire sectors of the planet erupted in controlled detonations, each one striking with precision. Military command centers collapsed into dust. Supply depots, shipyards, communication hubs, all of them vanished in perfect synchronization. The Valkyrie High Command scrambled, barking orders, demanding reports, but the responses were fragmented, panicked, useless. They were not under attack. They were being dismantled. And then the voices came. It was not a threat. It was not a demand. It was simply a broadcast, transmitted on every frequency, in every language, across every world that still swore allegiance to the Valkyrie Empire. The voice was steady. Unrelenting. Absolute. The universe has always known us as healers. We extended our hands to mend the broken, to soothe the suffering. Even to you, who never deserved such mercy, we offered peace. You spat upon it. You slaughtered those who held no weapons, those who asked for nothing but to heal. And in doing so, you have made your choice. Now, the time for peace has passed. You will know fear. You will know helplessness. You will watch your world burn, not as an act of war, but as a lesson. A lesson that will never be forgotten. As the voice faded, the fires rose higher. The Guardians did not bomb cities indiscriminately. They did not slaughter civilians. They did something worse. They erased everything that made the Valkyrie strong. Their command structure was shattered. Their supply lines severed. Their warships, once the terror of the stars, became floating husks, drifting uselessly in the void. And still, the fire burned. The Valkyrie fought back, but there was no enemy to strike. Every attempt to organize a counterattack was met with sudden, inexplicable failure. Officers vanished. Entire battalions found their weapons disabled, their armor unresponsive. Their own systems turned against them, as if the very infrastructure of their empire had been infected with a silent, inescapable rot. Then came the final act. The largest military archive of the Valkyrie Empire, a structure that held centuries of battle records, strategic data, and classified intelligence, erupted in flames. But the fire was not random. It burned in a pattern, shaping itself into something unmistakable. A symbol. It was ancient, a mark from Earth's past, known only to those who studied the oldest wars of human history. It was not a flag. It was not a crest of an empire. It was something simpler, yet infinitely more terrifying. It was a skull. The meaning was clear. The message undeniable. The Valkyrie had always believed themselves untouchable, their rule unshakable. But as they watched their empire collapse, their fleets crumble, their leaders disappear into the void, they finally understood. The Guardians were not warriors. They were not soldiers bound by the rules of engagement. They were something far older, something that predated the civilized galaxy itself. They were executioners. The surrender came within hours. The Valkyrie High Command, those who remained, did not beg for terms. They did not attempt to negotiate. They simply offered everything. Prisoners were returned. The remnants of Compassion's massacre were accounted for, the names of every doctor and nurse burned into history as a testament to their sacrifice. Reparations beyond measure were transferred. The Valkyrie swore oaths before the entire galactic community, not just of surrender, but of servitude. They would rebuild what they had destroyed. They would atone. Earth did not gloat. There were no parades, no speeches of victory. The Guardians did not return to receive medals or honors. They disappeared as they had come. Without a trace. In the years that followed, the story spread. Not just among the Valkyrie, but across the stars. Other empires, warlords, and conquerors took notice. There had always been rules to war, but now, there was a new one. A final law, unwritten yet absolute. You did not strike the healers. Because if you did, then you would face the ones who came afterward. The ones who did not forgive. The surrender of the Valkyrie should have marked the end. Their empire lay in ruins, their war machine dismantled, and their leaders forced to bow before the very species they had once considered beneath them. The galaxy had witnessed the Guardians' wrath, and in the silence that followed, no one dared question Earth's resolve. And yet, wars never end so cleanly. It began as whispers, fragments of intercepted transmissions, scattered reports from distant colonies, rumors spoken in hushed tones across the galactic underworld. At first, they were dismissed. The Valkyrie were broken. Their fleets were nothing but wreckage drifting in the void. Their command structure had been torn apart, their resources seized, their people cowed into submission. But then, a ship went missing. Not just any ship. A diplomatic vessel carrying a delegation from Earth and its closest allies, traveling under the banner of peace to oversee the rebuilding efforts on Valkyr Prime. There was no distress signal, no emergency beacon. It simply vanished. Then another. And another. Supply convoys were ambushed, their escorts annihilated before they could send a warning. Remote colonies reported strange disturbances, entire settlements blacked out, their inhabitants gone without a trace. The few survivors who managed to escape spoke of shadows moving in the dark, of voices that seemed to come from nowhere. It was impossible. The Valkyrie had no military left. Their fleets had been grounded, their weapons confiscated, their leadership monitored under constant surveillance. And yet, the attacks continued. The Guardians were reassembled. What should have been a final act of cleanup turned into something else entirely. They hunted the darkness, tracing every lost signal, every silent colony, every battlefield that had left no bodies behind. What they found sent chills through even the most hardened among them. The Valkyrie had not accepted defeat. They had not rebuilt their empire in secret. They had not gathered their forces for a desperate final battle. No, they had done something far worse. They had changed. The beings the Guardians fought now were not the same warriors who had once waged open war across the stars. They no longer stood in formation, no longer roared their battle cries or demanded their due as conquerors. They were ghosts, operating in absolute silence. They struck from the shadows, their weapons tuned not for destruction, but for removal. Bodies were never found. Entire teams disappeared in an instant, leaving only the faintest traces of conflict behind. And they weren't just fighting. They were hunting. For the first time, the Guardians found themselves on the defensive. Every mission became a risk. Every secured location became a potential trap. The enemy knew their tactics, their technology, their very thought processes. The Guardians, the most feared force in the galaxy, were being anticipated. How? The answer came in the most horrifying way possible. A single message, broadcast on an encrypted channel so deep within Earth's military network that it should have been impenetrable. You taught us. It was followed by coordinates. When the Guardians arrived, they did not find a battlefield. They found something far worse. It was a training ground, hidden within the shattered remains of a dead planet, a world long abandoned, its surface scarred by forgotten wars. Within its canyons and crumbling ruins, an army had been forged. But not in the way of the old Valkyrie. No, these soldiers had learned from Earth. They had studied the Guardians. Not through stolen records or intercepted transmissions, but through something far more personal. The prisoners. The humans taken from the lost ships, the vanished colonies, the missing teams. They had been forced to teach. Not by torture, not by coercion, but by something even more insidious: understanding. The Valkyrie had abandoned their old ways. They had discarded the traditions that had made them predictable. Instead, they had learned adaptation. They had taken Earth's greatest strength, its ability to evolve, to refine its methods, to grow, and made it their own. And now, they were ready. The battle that followed was unlike anything the Guardians had ever faced. The enemy moved as they did, thought as they did. Every strategy they employed was countered with chilling precision. Every maneuver was anticipated. The Guardians, who had always been the predators, found themselves becoming the prey. But Earth had one advantage the Valkyrie could never take from them. Their war was not fought alone. The message was sent. Not just to Earth, but to every world that had once cowered under the Valkyrie's rule. Every species that had suffered their wrath, every civilization that had endured their conquests. The Guardians had struck fear into the galaxy when they had exacted their vengeance. But now, they called upon something greater. Not fear. Justice. The Valkyrie had learned the ways of the Guardians. But they had forgotten one thing. The Guardians had never fought for themselves. They fought for those who could not fight for themselves. And now, the galaxy was ready to fight back. The war was no longer about vengeance. It was no longer about punishment or deterrence. What had begun as retribution for the slaughter at medical outpost Compassion had turned into something far more dangerous, something that threatened not just Earth, but the fragile balance of the galaxy itself. The Valkyrie had not only learned from the Guardians, they had evolved beyond them. They had adapted, refined, and weaponized the very tactics that had once made humanity's elite warriors unstoppable. Their forces no longer resembled the brutal, honor-bound legions of the past. Instead, they had become a precision instrument of war, moving like shadows, striking like ghosts, disappearing without a trace. The Guardians had fought many enemies before, but never had they faced a mirror so perfect. And now, the stakes were higher than ever. A distress signal, faint and fragmented, cut through the void of space. The source? The derelict wreckage of the Aegis Dawn, one of the first ships to vanish in the wake of the Valkyrie resurgence. It had been missing for months, presumed destroyed or worse, its crew either dead or captured. But now, there was a voice. A whisper, barely strong enough to push through the interference. They're coming. We didn't escape. They let us go. It's a trap. And then, silence. The Guardians mobilized, moving faster than they ever had before. The race was no longer just against an enemy, it was against time itself. Because if the Valkyrie had allowed the Aegis Dawn to be found, it meant one thing: they were no longer content with small, surgical strikes. The next move would be something greater, something catastrophic. And if they had learned from the Guardians, then whatever they were planning would be calculated, devastating, and merciless. Colonel Jeremiah Kane led the assault team personally. The Aegis Dawn drifted in the emptiness of space, its hull scarred, its lights flickering like the dying embers of a long-extinguished flame. The boarding party moved in silence, weapons drawn, scanning every corridor with precision. But there were no bodies. No signs of struggle. No evidence of a battle. Just emptiness. Then they found the bridge. The walls were lined with something new, something that sent a chill through even the most hardened among them. Data cores, hundreds of them, ripped from every ship, outpost, and base the Valkyrie had ever infiltrated. Stolen intelligence. Military strategies. Psychological profiles of every Guardian, every commander, every leader who had played a role in the war. The Valkyrie had not been retreating. They had been studying. And then, in the center of the bridge, a single, flickering hollow projector came to life. A face appeared. Not a Valkyrie. Not an enemy general. A human. Dr. Alina Ray, the lead physician from Medical Outpost Compassion, the woman whose desperate distress call had first ignited this war. She was alive. "You need to listen to me," she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion in her eyes. "You think you know what's coming. You don't. The Valkyrie aren't the ones in control anymore. They've made something else. Something they don't understand. And it's already moving." The message ended. And then the alarms began to scream. The Guardians barely made it off the Aegis Dawn before the ship erupted, its core detonating in a violent explosion meant to erase all evidence of what they had seen. But the damage had already been done. They had their warning. They had their proof. The Valkyrie had not just built an army. They had built something worse. And now, it was loose. The race was on. The execution was meant to be a message, an undeniable display of power, final and absolute. The Guardians had fought their way deep into Valkyrie territory, dismantling their war machine piece by piece. Now, standing in the heart of the enemy's stronghold, they had captured one of the highest-ranking Valkyrie commanders alive. High Warlord Terex was a legend among his kind, a warrior whose brutality had shaped the course of countless battles. He was responsible for the slaughter at Medical Outpost Compassion, the one who had given the order that set this war in motion. And now, bound and kneeling before the Guardians, he was about to answer for his crimes. A firing squad stood ready. Their rifles hummed with lethal energy, poised to erase Terex from existence. The room was silent, save for the heavy breaths of soldiers who had lost too much, who had seen friends and loved ones cut down by the Valkyrie. This wasn't just an execution, it was justice. Or at least, that was the plan. Then the alarms blared. Colonel Jeremiah Kane's instincts kicked in before his mind could fully register what was happening. The perimeter defenses had been breached. Not by Valkyrie reinforcements. Not by any force they had anticipated. By something else. The power flickered, the walls trembled, and then came the sound, an inhuman, guttural screech that sent ice through the veins of even the most battle-hardened warriors. It wasn't a sound of war, of battle cries or gunfire. It was something primal. Something hungry. The execution was forgotten in an instant. Weapons snapped toward the entrance as the heavy doors buckled under an unseen force. A second later, they were ripped from their hinges, metal twisting like paper. And then they came. Not Valkyrie. Not human. Something else entirely. They moved like shadows, like liquid darkness given form. They had no eyes, no discernible features, just shifting masses of sinew and blade. And they attacked without hesitation. The first Guardian fell before he could fire a shot, his armor sheared open like it was nothing. The second screamed as something wrapped around his leg, dragging him into the darkness beyond the threshold. The squad opened fire, but their bullets did nothing. Even the Valkyrie, battle-hardened and unyielding, hesitated. Terex, still bound, looked upon the creatures with something Kane had never seen in Valkyrie eyes before. Fear. "Release me," Terex said, his voice no longer carrying the arrogance of a warlord. "Or we all die here." Kane had every reason to ignore him. Every reason to let the creatures take him. But war was about survival, and right now, survival meant alliances, even the impossible ones. With a sharp motion, he sliced through Terex's restraints, tossing him a weapon. "You die fighting, or you die kneeling," Kane growled. "Your choice." Terex wasted no time. In a single motion, he rose and fired, cutting through the oncoming horrors with ruthless efficiency. The Guardians regrouped, forming a defensive line as the creatures swarmed. "What are they?" Kane demanded between bursts of gunfire. Terex didn't stop shooting, his face grim. "The Valkyrie thought we could control them. We were wrong." The creatures did not retreat. They did not falter. They moved with an unrelenting hunger, absorbing every ounce of pain the Guardians inflicted upon them. And for the first time in Kane's career, he realized that execution had been the least of their concerns. This wasn't just about justice anymore. This was about survival. And the battle for it had only just begun. The command center aboard the UEDC Dreadnought Judgment was silent as Colonel Jeremiah Kane stepped onto the central platform. The transmission was already live, broadcasting across every Valkyrie-controlled system. Every warlord, every soldier, every citizen of their empire was watching. There would be no misunderstandings. No second chances. Cain stood with his hands behind his back, his expression carved from stone. The battle scars on his armor, the blood still drying on the plates, told the story of what had just unfolded. The Guardians had torn through the Valkyries' strongholds, dismantling their military infrastructure piece by piece. They had fought monsters that even the Valkyrie feared, surviving when no one thought it possible. And now, after all the destruction, after all the death, the final warning was about to be delivered. The holographic feed showed the high warlords of the Valkyrie, their reptilian features grim. They were warriors to the core, bred for battle and conquest, yet today, even they knew fear. Their empire had never encountered an enemy like the Guardians before. They had underestimated humanity's wrath, and now they were paying the price. Cain let the silence stretch for a moment longer before he spoke. You attacked us at our weakest. You struck where there were no weapons, no soldiers, only healers, medics, and the wounded. You thought it would break us. That it would make us afraid. You were wrong. He stepped forward, eyes scanning the faces of the Valkyrie warlords. You made us angry. Behind him, the screen shifted to display the aftermath of Protocol Nemesis. Footage from the Guardians' operations played in real time. Their warships burned, their supply lines shattered, their elite units broken and scattered. The once mighty Valkyrie war machine lay in ruins. Their people had never seen such devastation before. Cain continued. You believed we were soft. That humanity, so obsessed with peace, would not have the stomach for war. But we are not weak. We do not break. And when you forced us into battle, you discovered what we are capable of. He turned, nodding to a technician. The screen changed again, showing an orbital view of a Valkyrie fortress world. The remains of their largest military installation were still burning. It had been their greatest stronghold, now reduced to ash. The Guardians had made sure of that. This is what happens when you cross us. The warlords shifted uncomfortably, their jaws tightening. Cain's voice lowered, but it carried more weight than before. You will surrender. Not just for now, not just for this war. You will disarm. You will retreat. If you so much as raise a single weapon against humanity again, there will be no negotiations, no warnings, no mercy. We will burn your empire from the stars and erase your name from history. The warlords said nothing. But their silence spoke volumes. They knew the truth. The Valkyrie were finished. They had pushed too far, awakened something in humanity that could never be undone. Cain leaned in slightly. Do not make us come back. The transmission ended. The message had been sent. And the galaxy would never forget it. The war was over. The Valkyrie, once a proud and brutal warrior race, had bowed their heads in surrender. Their warlords had accepted the terms, their fleets had powered down, and their remaining strongholds had been abandoned. Humanity had won. But victory came with a cost that could not be measured in destroyed ships or shattered planets. It was a price paid in silence, in the empty places where voices once laughed, in the eyes of the soldiers who had seen too much and could never go back to who they were before. Colonel Jeremiah Cain stood on the bridge of the judgment, staring down at what remained of the Valkyrie homeworld. Once, it had been a fortress, an unbreakable bastion of war. Now, it was something else entirely. The Guardians had done what they had to do, what they had been sent to do, but the sight before him did not bring the satisfaction he had expected. The planet was in ruins. The infrastructure that had fueled centuries of conquest was little more than rubble. The once feared fleets lay in silent orbit, disabled and abandoned. Without their war machine, the Valkyrie were no longer conquerors. They were survivors, and for the first time in their history, they faced a future not built on war. Kane turned as Major Ilana Santos approached. She had been one of the masterminds behind the psychological operations that had broken the Valkyrie resolve, the one who had found the right words, the right images, to make them understand that this was not a war they could win. But even she looked troubled now. "They're requesting aid," she said. Her voice was steady, but Kane could hear the tension beneath it. Food supplies, medical assistance. They weren't prepared for this kind of defeat. Their empire never planned for surrender. Kane exhaled slowly. Of course, they hadn't. The Valkyrie had always believed they would conquer or die. The idea of living without war had never been part of their culture. And yet, here they were, forced to face a reality where battle was no longer an option. He walked to the holo display, bringing up reports from the surface. Disease was spreading through the refugee camps. Starvation was imminent. They had lost too much, too quickly. They had been broken, and now they had nothing left. "We could let them suffer," Santos said quietly. "After what they did, no one would blame us." Kane looked at her. "Would you?" She hesitated. "No," she admitted. "But others might." He understood. There were voices back on Earth calling for complete annihilation. The Valkyrie had attacked a medical outpost, slaughtered doctors and wounded civilians, and in response, the Guardians had unleashed a storm of fire and blood upon them. The desire for vengeance still burned hot, and there were those who would say the Valkyrie had earned every moment of their suffering. But Kane knew the truth. This wasn't about what the Valkyrie deserved. It was about what humanity would become if they let hatred dictate their actions. They had fought this war because they refused to be victims. But mercy, that was a choice. And it was the hardest one they would ever have to make. "Send the supplies," Kane said. "Medical teams, too. We'll secure the camps, keep the peace, but we help them rebuild." Santos nodded but didn't move. "There's something else," she said. "A delegation of Valkyrie leaders wants to meet. They're asking for guidance. They don't know how to rule without war." Kane wasn't surprised. For generations, the Valkyrie had lived by the sword, conquering or dying. Now, with their weapons taken from them, they had no idea what came next. They were warriors without a purpose, and that made them dangerous. If someone else didn't give them a new path, they might find their way back to the old one. "Set up the meeting," he said. "We'll show them another way." Santos hesitated again. "Do you really think they can change?" Kane turned back to the viewport, watching the broken world below. "They don't have a choice," he said. "And neither do we." Mercy was not weakness. It was not surrender. It was the price of victory. The question was whether humanity was willing to pay it.